session on general average and intermediaries. This discussion is going to be the role of general average in the shipping industry, together with its development and the present state of affairs. Our speaker today is Mr. Muthu Jagannath, who is better known in the industry as Jagan. And I think the whole industry and everybody over here, I'm sure, knows him. He's been always, giving out free lectures, giving and helping people understand what shipping is all about. A little more about him. He's been in this industry for 25 years in various facets of shipping and international trade. He is the founder of NAU Private Limited, a marine claims consultancy and correspondent firm in Singapore, involved in handling and adjusting various marine-related claims. He also is an arbitrator and mediator and is listed in as a panel arbitrator in many institutions around the globe, some of them being the Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration, China Maritime Arbitration Commission, Dubai International Arbitration Center, the Asian International Arbitration Center, and the Indian Council of Arbitration. He is a court-appointed volunteer mediator at the Singapore State Courts and also available to appointments for commercial mediation. Like I said, he frequently lectures on shipping, marine insurance, and related matters at various forums. And in his free time, writes regularly on transport, maritime insurance, dispute resolution, related matters, which can be viewed on the NAU's website. Sir, on to you, sir. All yours.
Thank you, Harish. Good afternoon, everybody. I think first of all, I must thank AMTOI for organizing this webinar, and I'm delighted to share my thoughts on this evergreen topic, and which will continue to rear its head time and again, unless the industry, the container industry at large, tries to find a more appropriate solution, hopefully at least to deal with small and medium-sized general averages. The reason why I use the word intermediaries is because, leaving the property owners, who's generally the ship owner, the cargo owner, all others in this voyage are basically intermediaries. So that was the reason I am aware that parties who are attending this are basically AMTOI's members. So the reason I put this is so that all others may not have a direct interest, may have an indirect interest, but they are not directly involved, so to say. Prima facie, all losses which happen during navigation lie where they fall. They're both, if a ship has a collision or if there's any damage to the cargo during the voyage, it lies where it falls, unless there are any statutory or contractual exceptions. When I talk about contractual exceptions, you'll be aware of your bills of lading, which does allow you to exclude liability. So that's what I mean by contractual exclusions. And when you talk about statutory exclusions, I mean, whatever is the law. Like in India, you have these the multimodal transport MTGA 1993 in place. So unless there is any specific provision, the loss lies where it falls. This is with respect to fortuitous losses which happen by chance. What about non-fortuitous losses which happen voluntarily? And what do I mean by voluntary losses? I mean sacrifice or expenditure to deal with the aftermath of a fortuitous loss. So if you really look back, you look at GA happening after some sort of a fire incident or some sort of a collision incident. So this happens after something happens, yes? And therefore you are spending something knowing well that, listen, this is a voluntary act, and that's what we talk about as the general average. The doctrine of general average is basically an exception to the principle which I stated earlier, that losses lie where they fall. Any sacrifice deliberately and voluntarily made or any expense reasonably incurred to prevent a total or some greater loss, this expenditure or this sacrifice is actually shared by everyone by way of a contribution. The application of this ancient rule of maritime law was known to the Rhodesians, whose regulations on this subject were adopted into the Roman civil law and then which came into English law by the Digest of Justinian. Some historians say that India and China also had a very rich maritime history. So I want to be very frank, I'm also searching for some sort of links to see if something similar, you have some sort of a GA or some sort of a risk allocation which was decided in the past. So we will see as it goes. So what is general average? General average applies by operation of law, or if there is no law, in the sense no statutory law, there could be on the basis of common law. If you look at UK Marine Insurance Act 1906, which India has also incorporated in their, in the Marine Insurance Act, Section 66(2) of the UK Marine Insurance Act talks about general average, that there is a general average act where any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is voluntarily and reasonably made or incurred in time of peril for the purpose of preserving the property imperiled in the common adventure. I have deliberately underlined some words to show that there are 5 requirements which are necessary for a general average. And it should be an extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure, it should be voluntarily, there must be a peril, it must preserve the property, and there must be more than one interest. This common means more than one interest, and who benefit out of this. Even that adjustment of general average is generally done when the voyage is over at an end. The practices of dealing with general average would vary from port to port. And therefore, to prevent issues arising with the way the adjustment is done, various countries decided to discuss together, the participants or the professionals decide to discuss together. And that's how the York-Antwerp rules came into place. To have some sort of a common basis wherein, you don't have to have a difference of way how its adjustment is done. If you look at the definition of general average insofar as York-Antwerp rules is concerned, I've actually used Rule A of York-Antwerp rules 1994, which is the most commonly used as of now. Although 2016 rules is the most latest version, so to say. So you would find there is a minor difference in the wordings, but it does say the same thing. So Rule A of the York-Antwerp rules provides for general average when and only when any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is intentionally and reasonably made or incurred for the common safety for the purpose of preserving from peril the property involved in a common maritime adventure. The fact is, invariably, all documents, all contracts invariably provide for York-Antwerp rules. So you will probably find that the common law or the statute, that the Marine Insurance Act, will be, overruled or not overruled in the sense that you would use the York-Antwerp rules because contractually you are provided for it. I will not focus on English law, I will focus on York-Antwerp rules for that reason. But there is one basic difference. Insofar as general average in English law is concerned, as soon as the property comes in a position of safety, general average ceases. But in the York-Antwerp rules, it goes one step further. You want to see a common benefit of completion of adventure. So there is actually a wider scope of general average insofar as York-Antwerp rules is concerned, vis-a-vis the English, Marine Insurance Act or English GA, so to say. I think at this point of time, I would like to touch on PA, or particular average. Basically, it takes place in the property. It stays where it falls. It's accidental and fortuitous. Examples are damage to the cargo or damage to the ship. So that is borne by the party who has ownership on that aspect. Whereas the difference in the general average is it's incurred for common safety or safe prosecution, does not fall on any specific particular party, but contributed by all interested parties. The crucial difference between these two is that this should be intentional. Yes. So voluntary or intentional is a crucial difference. It's so far as particular average is concerned, this is not done intentionally. GA can be of 2 types. You can look at sacrifice, and sacrifice is confined to property, involves physical damage to the property. It's quantified in monetary terms in the diminution, in the sense that if you have a grounding incident and you try to extract the vessel by using the machinery, which you're not supposed to do, you will have damage to the vessel. and the vessel, and the diminution would be the repair cost following the incident. And the way you will try to resolve this sacrifice is to look at, made good by the surviving interest, because someone has actually done this sacrifice for the benefit of all others. They need to contribute on a pro rata basis. Then you look at expenditure. It involves, monetary expenses and is quantified as such, does not result in a reduction in value. Like if you, engage, a salver or you engage a salvage services to actually take the vessel from a place of danger, you're going to pay some charges. It's not going to reduce the value of the vessel, but these are charges you're paying to someone else, a third party. So examples like this are basically contractual salvage, expenses incurred for steaming to a port of refuge, etc. If you recall, I did say that English law perhaps has a more, a fairer, I will qualify this, a way of general average, because as soon as the vessel comes to common safety, general average ceases. But insofar as what happens is when you have your convention or you agree on some rules, there is a bit of compromise. Most of the other nations who are practicing general average, or the way the adjustment of general average was done, they believe that the general average should not cease when the vessel comes to a moment of safety. It should be to the completion of adventure. Therefore, in the York and Folk rules, you will probably find there is a compromise, in which case GA continues till the time the voyage can be accomplished. So that might not, the cargo interest might not like it, but that's the way it is, in the sense that if you're contractually incorporated York and Folk rules, this is what you're going to get. So who contributes it? When I talked about, in the beginning, I said about intermediaries, yes. So basically, you look at it, the people who contribute, who have some interest on it. The vessel owner, he contributes to the value of the vessel. If you are a time charter, then you have some fittings. If you have a container vessel, you might have some specialized fittings for the vessel. Or bunkers. Bunkers sometimes can be of a very high value, especially for a very big vessel. It can go in millions of dollars. So again, these are property interests and cargo. The issue nowadays is sometimes or often the value of cargo dwarfs the value of the vessel and bunkers. Therefore, the contribution paid by the cargo interest would be substantial vis-a-vis the vessel and the other interests involved in the vessel. So that is the main issue. What about freight? If freight is at risk, it should contribute. But in the liner trade, freight is generally not at risk. It is earned at the time of loading, even though you may provide for freight, to be paid at collect basis, that is at the completion of voyage. But you would generally find there is a clause in the bill of lading that freight is earned on loading or when cargo is loaded, which means, freight is not at risk. If the freight is not at risk, it does not contribute. And therefore, what happens is the generally freight, it becomes merged in the value of cargo, and therefore the cargo contributes on CIF values, so therefore it takes care of the freight. My talk is basically focused on the intermediaries, yes. So intermediaries include all others who are involved. They may include freight forwarders and agents, NVOCC'S, container operators, and multimodal transport operators. Given that there are various definitions in the market, I thought, it is best to define, at least for the purpose of this talk and what I'm saying, what are the various, how do I define this, so to say. The first one is an agent. An agent is someone who basically facilitates, who does not do anything himself. He uses a third party. As long as he has done his job properly, you cannot pursue him. There is no fault or negligence on his part. He would probably say that, listen, I am not a party to the contract. You need to go to the contractual party. Therefore, a freight forwarder is someone who only facilitates. However, sometimes you may have contracts. At the time of booking, you might find that the carrier may try to impose contractual provisions stating that the agents are also a party to the contract. And the common clauses which come to my mind are the BIFA clause or the SLA STC, which says that, the customer warrants that he is either the owner of the cargo or the authorized agent of the owner, and that is authorized to accept and is accepting these conditions, not only for himself, but for his principal. So what happens is if an agent takes a booking and he agrees on any of these incorporated terms, he would find that he is a party to the contract. Yes, and that's the reason why I thought, you need to look at it. Agents generally are not liable, but if there is any contractual incorporation, they may become liable because they are contractually accepted. In the bills of lading, you also have another way where you try to define it more widely by putting the merchant. If you look at the merchant definition of the bill of lading, it tries to put everybody involved in the chain as a merchant, so to say. My view is, although the definition of a merchant is so wide, it will not bite because a freight forwarder perhaps will not see the bills of lading terms before it is being issued, or unless he has been brought to his notice at that point of time that this is the terms and conditions you are bound by. What about NVOCCs? They are basically contractual carriers issuing their own bills of lading, may include consolidators. They are a party in the contractual chain with the overline carrier, in the sense that they would be contracting with either a slot operator, a vessel operator, and the vessel operator, if he might be chartering, you'd have a charter party there. So if they're a contractual party, and therefore they would have some exposure, so to say. Since they are in the contractual chain, you need to look at whether an NVOCC or an MTO has any exposure, so to speak. If the container is owned by the MTO or NVOCC, then that is a separate exposure, which I will deal with it in the next slide. But insofar as the cargo is concerned, the cargo is not owned by the NVOCC. So he is not contractually responsible for it unless his overlying contract does provide for some sort of exposure. So therefore, you would need to look at the overlying bill of lading, to see whether there is any exposure on this. This actually comes more in the groupage boxes, because you might have 20 or 30 cargo interests in one container, in which you might find that 15 cargo interests provide security, and there's other 2 or 3 who do not provide security. The overlying carrier owners will not release the container and the cargo till such time they have got security for all the cargos. So in which case, this consolidator may face issues not only from parties who have given the security, but also from the carrier if they have issued the carrier's box, because they will have to pay detention and demurrage and other costs which may arise. So this is something which you need to bear, especially if you're doing the consolidation business. You may have exposure because your counterparty, your downward counterparty has not provided security. The problem in actual practice is sometimes adjusters are not aware of practical issues. While the bills of lading says that you generally say carrier is not responsible for delays, the value of cargo is dependent on timely delivery, especially for cargos which require to reach in time. I can give you an example. I was involved in a GA in which it was Goddess Durga, which was being transported by a container in a consolidation container, and due to a GA incident, it did not reach the puja in time. So therefore, what happens in these type of things, the value which was there at the beginning of the voyage becomes zilch if it is not timely delivered. The same is the case of diaries. If the diary is not delivered by November, December, there is no market if it reaches on January. So I think this is the issue. Timely delivery also has an impact on the value. Having said that, York-Penfolds rules only provide, insofar as cargo is concerned, that the value is on the basis of CIF invoice value, that is Rule 17 of York-Penfolds rules. There is no provision to take these aspects, and therefore there may not be any, the adjuster may not have any flexibility to consider this. But that's unfortunate, but this is the way it happens. What about container detention? A carrier who issues his own, he gives his own container would obviously say that he's, losing use of his container, provided there is a proper contractual incorporation in his contract. I believe that there is a fair argument that the carrier would be entitled to seek some sort of a recovery for these charges. So therefore, if you are an overlying carrier, if you have issued your own bills of lading, it is not your own container. This is the exposure you have. What about container operators? The main difference between an NVO and a container operator is someone who owns and operates his own boxes. But insofar as the contractual provision is concerned, they are doing the same thing. They issue their own bills of lading. Since containers are also a physical property, you have an exposure insofar as security is concerned and a GA is there. Fortunately, container shells are not very expensive, especially if it's a dry box. It should not be more than $2,000 to $2,500 per container. But if you are dealing with specialized containers like reefer containers or ISO tanks, it can easily exceed 25 to 50,000, depending on the type of containers you're there. So you would need to give some sort of security, either by cash deposit or by guarantees for security when a GA is there. What about cargo? It all, again, as I said in the earlier slides, it all depends on slot charter parties. If there is any provision, you may have an issue on that, but otherwise, it generally falls onto the cargo interests themselves. So when you talk about security, what security is required? When you have a GA, what the adjusters want is an average bond, basically an undertaking by the cargo interest that they will pay the GA contribution, which is rightfully due, and it is signed by the cargo interest. Along with this, the average adjuster will ask for an average guarantee, and this average guarantee is given by a cargo insurer. Adjusters will only accept guarantees from insurers where they are comfortable with. Which, when I say comfortable, in the sense that insurers have good reputation, are properly secured, have a good rating, because that there would be time taken to make this adjustment. And if you are uninsured or they are not comfortable with the insurer providing the guarantee, they would seek a cash deposit in lieu. And that would be generally, if you look at the cash deposit, the adjuster will calculate what the total amount of expense has been incurred, and to be on the safe side, he may take an upward amount and he will try to seek a deposit for that amount, put it in a bank till the time the adjustment has been done. At this point of time, I'll touch on salvage, because although salvage is different from general average, you would generally find that salvage works in combination. You would probably need to have a salvage if there is a casualty. You can also do contractual salvage in the sense that you can go to a salvage to try and help you out of this. Salvage, definition is without contract, and that's where you see Lloyd's open form. But with contract, you can put it in the Rule 6 in the York and Thorpe rules, allows you to take the salvage charges, put it to GA, and that's how you try to build it. Similar to what you require in a general average, you would require a salvage guarantee by the salvage is required, but the only difference is this guarantee is for the value of the cargo as soon as the vessel comes to a position of safety. Whereas in general average, it is for the completion of voyage. So this is a major difference. Therefore, you will need to, there might be more expenses incurred after the position of safety. Now, insofar as this talk is concerned, I think I've gone all through all the definitions of what a GA is. I think we now hit on the issues which may happen to an intermediary. The first issue is basically misdeclared cargo. So cargo which is properly declared may also raise issues, but there's a bigger issue of misdeclared cargo, because sometimes cargoes can become dangerous being voyage. And therefore, if a carrier and operator is involved upwards in the chain, the contractual parties will look at whom they are in a contract with, and they would like to pursue that. So that is an issue. I can give you an example of Express Pearl. You had an issue of a fire, and obviously owners will be looking at the container operator to see whether they could pursue recovery, even though the container operator may be innocent and it might be the fault of the cargo interest. But because you have a contractual chain, you'll go after the contractual party to see whether you can try and recover. What about completion of voyage? Recently, I heard that the container operator actually discharged the container because they did not get the security in an intermediary port, in a port before the completion of voyage. Because they didn't get security, they did not continue with the voyage insofar as that specific container and cargo was concerned. GA, insofar as I am concerned, you're only entitled for security once you have completed the voyage. Yes. So therefore, the BL issuer, whether it's a multimodal transport operator or it's a NVOCC, may have an exposure on the completion of voyage, so to say. And the other issues are contractual recoveries. Because if you look at an intermediary, he doesn't have a property involved in this. He doesn't own anything except perhaps of the containers. The container shells you need to give security. And therefore, the other issues is whether the owners or the overlying carriers can try to actually recover from the parties down the chain, a contractual recovery, saying for the non-provision of security or for demurrage or detention for the use of this container. So how do you deal with these issues? I think the most important is to know your customer, to be close to your customer, know the cargo which you're carrying, and to recommend to your customer that they should take cargo insurance. More than 50% of the cargo which is being carried in the liner trades is uninsured. The cost of cargo insurance is not substantial, it is very reasonable. The problem crops up that when you have a GA or salvage and you are uninsured, then the amount of security required is actually a pretty big sum. And therefore, then you have a bit of an issue where you're trying to say, how do you give it? So I think with the KYC, which is know your customer, is to work with your customer, engage with them, discuss with them so that they probably have, they know what is GA all about, they know about the risk management, and they take cargo insurance. If you're an agent, avoid imposition of liability. I know it's sometimes difficult because you may have to, swim with the sharks, so to say. You cannot, if you do not want to do it, you may not do the booking. But where you can try to avoid an imposition of liability, a joint and several liabilities, so to say, so that if something happens, as an agent, you can say, listen, not my fault, please go to the cargo interest, it's not my exposure. If you're an NVOCC, a container operator, a MTO, consider bridging security. If what I'm trying to say is you should be willing to provide security or interim security till the completion of voyage. It is available in the insurance market. You should probably talk to your brokers, say that, listen, I am doing this. Is there a potential or possibility that my insurers are willing to give a bridging security till the completion of voyage, and we will not deliver till the time we get the actual security from the cargo interest? There will be a cost to it, but the advantage of having this bridging security is the voyage will continue without any delays. If you own containers, you should take equipment cover. It's not, like I said, it is on same similar terms like insured cargo clauses. The wordings are insured container clauses. So it's an equipment cover. It will pay for the GA securities. And if you are operating as a carrier, NVO, an agent, you should seek a liability insurance dealing with your liability exposures. Please understand that even though you may have a defense, you would have to spend money to defend. And the costs of defense are something which your insurer will pay. He or she will engage lawyers, consultants to deal with it. Otherwise, you would find that you have a perfectly valid defense, but you need to spend money to deal with it. And if you don't have this insurance, you may have to spend it yourself. So it might be much better that you have a before the event insurer who takes over this exposure, so to say, by paying a fixed sum known as a premium. And my recommendation is, you should always think about a bridging security if you are dealing with, to try and avoid issues. Generally discretionary, but I think, this is something I believe insurers, if they are able to see that it is valid, why not? They will be willing to provide. I think to conclude, it's very important to know your role. When you have a GA, many a times people start running around, what is my role? I think if you know what the issues are, you can guide your customer. Listen, I'm only acting as a carrier. I don't have any exposure. Your job, because you're a property owner, you need to provide security. If you can guide them, it's much more easier. People are happier. Assist your clients by providing the relevant information. As soon as the GA is declared, you would have a lot of information floating. So you could provide the same information to your clients. Say this is what is required. Hold their hands, help them. Actually, my view is whenever there's a problem, if you assist your clients, you can actually come spelling of roses. You come out much better. You're more professional. And that's what you should probably do. Assist your clients and hopefully assist them that in the future, they don't, if they're not insured, they have insurance to deal with such exposures. And if you are exposed, if you have exposures, like I say, if you have a contractual exposure, then I think you should ensure that you immediately inform your insurers, you have help to deal with those exposures. Don't allow those exposures to blossom up to be a very big amount. There are ways to force a carrier to deal with the exposures instead of doing nothing. So I think when you have a problem, it is like going to the doctor and let the doctor deal with it. So that's the way I will probably deal with it. That in a nutshell is what I intended to present. I have finished with the presentation and I am happy to take questions.
So yeah, thank you. If you can stop sharing the screen, we'll get you on the screen also.
Okay,
Can you
stop video? Or?
No, stop share. Stop share, the red one.
The red one. Yep.
Yeah. So now that you are on the screen,
yeah.
And thank you very much. It was wonderful, very knowledgeable. There are some clarities that were required. So of what I have been able to understand is that it's the cargo owner and the vessel owner, right? The general average end of the day is going to go to the cargo owner, and between the cargo owner and the vessel owner is what I understand about this. And everybody in between, automatically becomes an intermediary because it's the owner of the cargo who end of the day is going to pay. Am I right on that?
So one caveat, it's also the charter if he has bunkers, property owners.
Okay, now I have a question before Priya comes up with all the question and answers. What happens if I am loading my container on a common carrier which belongs to a company but has no bills of lading? Then it's my bills of lading that covers it, right? If I am carrying it, say from here to Dubai, and there are so many vessels that are available, feeder vessels, how does it come into effect over there?
If you do not have a general average clause in your contract, doesn't mean general average is not there. General average happens by operation of law. So when the voyage is over, when the voyage is over, when it comes to Dubai, you will probably find, does Dubai have a provision for general average? And invariably, all maritime nations have general average by common law. So it's there.
I just needed clarity on that. And the second one that I want to ask you is, how is it that if a vessel's engine fails, it still falls under general average? It's, that's a question that has been bothering me for a long time, which says that, oh, the vessel, the gearbox, or the engine failed, vessel was delayed, general average declared. A little clarity on that, because this is what we see as forwarders, multimodal operators, where we get these letters.
I think you raised a very, very important point. You hit the nail on the head of the nail, so to say. When the vessel's engines fail, it's a fortuitous loss. So far as the repair to the engine is concerned, that is PA. But in order to complete the voyage, if you engage a salvage staff, you're doing for the common benefit. Because the owners will say, listen, my engine has failed. My voyage is frustrated. So if you say that your voyage is frustrated, owners will just discharge the cargo. There is a cost for discharging the cargo, which the owners will also ask for. And the cargo interest will then have to forward the cargo from that place where it's been discharged. There will be other forwarding cost which is there. So therefore, If in the common benefit, owners say, listen, the voyage is frustrated. It can be frustrated because the repairs cannot be done in time, or it has to be done at a place which is very far off, or time. If you're dealing with a place where there's going to be ice, you need to reach within a specific period of time. So what you do is, if you use salvage trucks to move your vessel, these are costs, and these costs could be incorrectly put on the owners because the owner is only looking at maintenance of his vessel. Ideally, you would say, if I can repair, I'll repair. So these costs are expenditures which will come on the general average. So that's then what happens. These are voluntary costs for the common benefit to complete the voyage. That's what we're talking York and for rules. This is what will happen. If you do not have the York and for rules, you're correct. Under English law, general average ceases as soon as you come in a position of safety, as soon as you come to a port of refuge, and the cost of repairs go there. But then, if the owner knows that it's going to be more costly, his instinctive reaction would be to discharge the cargo.
Okay, because it seems a little unfair. I'm just, when it's an engine failure, it seems a little unfair that why should a customer or the cargo owner suffer for your engine loss? It does not apply anywhere else. Like, if you're doing a normal trucking or any other kind of business.
I agree with you on that. What happens is we look at York and Purpose. How does York and Purpose then negotiate? Different maritime law association of every country go and negotiate. So if you want to have some changes, like you are in the 2016 rules, the next time you have the next rules, there should be someone from the Indian Maritime Law Association. Because India is not, although India wants to sell itself as a ship owning nation, they don't have significant interest.
Agree.
So you should try and look at from what interest. So most of the nation, they look at what is their interest. If you're a ship owning nation, you obviously you look at laws or contracts or provisions which are beneficial to your constituents.
Agree.
Unfortunately, if you want to change it, you need to be present there. You need to negotiate. You need to say Rule 10, Rule 11 should be amended. The provision of the rules which you're talking about, even the temporary repair, they should be amended to be more equitable. But as of now, because it is provided contractually, it is as it is. But I hear you on that. But something which we
Fair. Thank you. Priya, if you may take the questions.
First of all, thank you. That was one knowledgeable session, and it's so great to hear you again and again, Mr. Jagannath. I mean, it's just a fantastic thing. So we've received some of the questions from all our members who were online, and some had sent before the session. So I've just tried to compile them easier for you to read and for the others to read as well. We'll take the first question, messages from Mr. Satish. He wants to understand the liability of an MTO in case of general average.
I think you need to look at this, is there a contractual exposure to the MTO if he is doing with the overline carrier? And the MTO would, in most cases, be contracting with someone, a ship owner or a slot charterer or a vessel operator. You need to look at that, what is the exposure on that? But insofar as the property is concerned, the MTO does not own. Very rarely will the MTO be carrying his own cargo. It's otherwise the cargo interest will provide. The MTO may also be having interest in their own containers. Yes, if it is his own equipment, then he needs to take equipment insurance. So the exposure is limited, but you need to be careful of the contractual liability. I hope that answers that question.
I hope so too. I mean, I'm sure that answers the question. The next question is from Mr. Ramakrishnan, our stalwart from our industry, who wants to have a clarity on who's an intermediary.
I think we did that.
We did that. I just said that, insofar as the stock is concerned, the main participants are property owners. Anyone standing outside, insofar as the stock is an intermediary. So even if you're a carrier, a contractual carrier, if you do not have a property, then your exposure is not there. In the sense that, at least in the liner trade, you don't have any exposure. So the intermediary for this stock is anyone who's not a property owner, who's involved in this thing in various facets.
Absolutely. Our IPP, Mr. Shantanu Badkamkar, he has a question. He has a couple of questions. So one of the things he wants to ask is it time to revisit the clause of general average under the so-called freedom of contract, where the shipper enters into a one-sided contract with a vague definition open for arbitrary interpretation to demand a more circumstance-specific definition? I guess I'll go one by one, or
No issues. I think Mr. Shantanu always picks the toughest questions, which is
yeah, that's why I thought I'll go slow and part by part.
I think there is a lot of clamor for not having gender average, and I'm actually for gender average. But I'll tell you why. Because once you have some sort of an incident in C, right? If you do not have the issue, if you don't have a provision of gender average, then the owners will probably say, why should I do so? Why should I incur additional expenditure? They will probably say, let the loss lie where it falls, because the owners won't be having hull insurance, pay for it. They will not continue with the voyage. And therefore, not having gender average would have a detriment, so to say. So it is not, it's not a panacea, but at the same time, yes, there is scope for development of gender average to make sure it's more equitable. If you could just put the Mr. Shantanu's question, I'll probably pick and choose so that I don't lose my train of thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Just a minute. There were more questions, was trying to compile them as well. Here, sorry. Yeah.
So I think, yes, it is a freedom of contract, and I do understand that if you look at the bills of lading, it is an addition contract. But the courts in almost all jurisdictions are held that the bills of lading contract valid, and because it is being told. Even if you do not have a GA clause, the GA clause, like I said, GA is there as of right by operation of law. You can have it by when the voyage ends, or based on what is the law of the contract, so to say. So GA is there. The issue is whether you are comfortable with your kind of rules as of now. So the question is, cargo interests may feel that it is not fair, and they have a valid point, because they like what he has brought, that sometimes there is an engine failure, and why should I be saddled with costs related to the engine failure? But it's a question of looking at it, whether it's fair or not, trying to make it more restrictive. And that can only be done by negotiation by all cargo interest owning nations. If they are not there, if they don't put it forward, if they don't negotiate, then obviously, the clauses will still continue to be the same way it is. Although the oceans have become, safer by better technology, you can never predict. A few days back, I was in Chennai, yes, and there was a cyclone, and anything could have happened. There's a lot of loss of life and this thing. So technology might make it easier, but you will always have issues. The seas are not, it's not so safe all the time. So you will always have losses, and therefore you need to have some sort of a way where you can share losses which cannot be borne by one party. And that is what the GA does. I think the other way you can look at, even if GA is not there, you can look at restitution. English law has a way of which is a developing law of restitution, in the sense that, if you spend money for somebody else and he gets a benefit, it would be inequitable if the other party gets a benefit by not paying. That law is developing. So if GA was not there, perhaps that would have developed to pay. But as it is, GA is there. I think what you all should do is if you're not happy with the way the GA is there, work towards getting it more restrictive so that parties are more comfortable.
So Shantanu has also added that the waters are considered safe compared to when the concept of GA came into existence. The relationship between the shipper and the shipping line has changed considerably. New technologies, safety measures, and reasonable predictability of weather and other uncertainties. How do courts look at it?
I think what happens is you have to understand that when you look at the courts, will look at it is a contract, because job and work rules look at contract. If they say it is a voluntary expenditure for the common benefit, if it fulfills that, it is there. The only way you could perhaps deny it is by Rule D. Rule D of the York and Thorpe rules allows a party to deny contributions if you can prove that there is an actionable fault. So you then need to go back, what is the contract of carriage based on? So you have the Hague-Bisbee rules or the Hague rules, which are generally the rules applied. If you're an MTO, you will have the MTO Act, MTGA Act, so to say, which will apply. So generally you will find that there are exclusions insofar as navigation in the seas are concerned, the navigation exception, so to say. So owners generally have a very strong defense insofar whatever happens in sea. And it might not be due to the weather. It may also be due to the negligence of the master or the crew. Yes. So I think what happens is after that, when you spend for the common benefit, that is the issue which comes. So therefore, I think, while I understand what Mr. Shantanu is getting at, the fact is GA is not only for which are unpredictable, but also for things which happens by human error. So, you're looking at from the fact of, listen, we have spent much more than what is there. If this was not there, this redistribution of costs is not there, owners might not be willing to do it, and this is one way to redistribute it. So that is the way I probably look at it. Technologies will make it easier, but you still will have losses.
The next question is from Mr. Ashish Pandey. He wants to know how to improve the line's information on real-time availability status. Now, that's something I'm sure not Mr. Jagannath's specialty, but would you like to comment on this or just leave it?
I will be happy to comment because, to be very frank, recently Hapag-Lloyd and NMSC are actually investing in technologies where they are putting a tracker inside the containers. The problem is who's going to pay. I actually went to my clients. The cargo interests, are they willing to pay higher freight for it? This is a time when the market is really collapsed. And you ask me $1 or $2, the question is, why should I pay? So unless there is a need and the market is willing to pay, technology exists. It has been there for many years. But the question is, who's going to pay? If someone is willing to pay, it is available. Hapag-Lloyd has started. I would assume that would be the industry standard after 10, 15 years. But as of now, I don't think that's the industry standard.
Absolutely. So Mr. Anbu would like to know important criteria on transit insurance, open maritime insurance, warehouse to warehouse insurance to be informed by a forwarder to the exporter or importer, liability of a forwarder on such claims, transit insurance for cross-country or switch shipments. So this is purely insurance related, but yes.
I think, when I was young, when I started my career, I didn't know anything about this class of business. So I should probably tell the cargo interest, we are insured, thinking that it also covers cargo. Your liability insurance does not cover cargo. It only covers liability to cargo. The cargo should always be insured. Your transit insurance or your liability insurance, which an operator has, is only engages when there is a liability, when there is a fault, when there is a mistake, and only then it gets triggered. It is not meant to respond for the property loss, so to say. And even if it responds, there is a cap to it. There is a limitation of liability available in the contract of carriage. If you have the Hague or Hague-Bisbee rules, there are exclusions or limitations of liability. It works on that principle. So this itself is a separate topic, but to keep it very simple, your liability insurance is for whatever role you're doing as an operator, as long as you declare it to your insurer and you pay premium for it. Insofar as the cargo is concerned, you should ask the cargo interest to take specific cargo insurance and let the insurers deal with it. I hope that answers that question.
Ashu Bhatnagar, the question says that to understand the role of GA in shipping industry from intermediaries perspective. I'm not sure here, does the GA mean general average?
That's exactly what this whole thing was.
I guess this question is already answered.
It
was in fact one of the 3 questions.
The presentation answered that question.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next, Mr. Emmanuel Raj has asked, what are the liabilities that a freight forwarder has to be aware of when issuing a direct liner BL?
I think what happens is the freight forwarder is issuing his own BL. In turn, he would be getting a carrier's or overlying carrier's BL. So contractually, insofar as the overlying carrier is concerned, the freight forwarder will be the shipper or consignee. And he or she will look at the freight forwarder for the delivery of the cargo, for the payment of charges. In turn, the freight forwarder will look at the cargo interest. Now, this is back to back with a major difference that parties are different. If the cargo interest is a naughty one, or he's got no money, yes, then the exposure is to the freight forwarder. So, although it is back to back, it is not completely back to back because the parties are different. So you need to ensure that the party you are dealing with is also someone who's going to deal with this, delivery of cargo, payment of charges.
Jagan, what he means over here is that if as a freight forwarder, if I have taken a shipping line's BL and handed over to the
Shipping.
customer, he's not used his own BL in
Fine.
between. So
If it's a shipping line's BL, then he acts as a freight forwarder. Unless there's an imposition of contractual liability, and that I did cover in my presentation. If there is a, in the sense that you are jointly and severally liable, and it depends. If you have that, then the carrier could impose, listen, you are a joint party to this contract, you are still liable. Otherwise, under common law, a freight forwarder is only liable for the freight. So that means if the shipper doesn't pay the freight, under common law, at least the English common law, the freight forwarder is only responsible for the unpaid freight. He is not responsible for any other exposures, unless someone is able to prove that there is some fault, there is some negligence, which it was done deliberately.
So while you said about freight, he's responsible for freight. The next part of his question is, how do they protect themselves when there is detention and the party at the other end is not taking the cargo, not picking up the cargo? So then the shipping lines also hold the freight forwarder liable for.
They do, and many a times I've told my customer, I've also responded to carriers that we are not responsible because we don't have any direct liability. The problem is sometimes they do dadagiri, so to say. So you need to go to courts to try and settle it out, or better sense prevails and people talk and negotiate and settle it. But legally speaking, my view is, if you're a freight forwarder, you are not directly responsible. You're only a booking party, you're only an agent. It should be between the original parties.
So, Mr. Rahul, would like to understand the step-by-step process of GA along with demarcation of liabilities amongst the parties involved.
The presentation did that already.
Did that. So a couple of them have also asked for a copy of the presentation. Manada,
by all means.
So, okay, we can share the presentation. We have his permission to do that.
Great, thank you. So the next question says we need to understand the calculation of losses and average guarantee.
I think what the adjuster will do is he will ask the owners how much he's spending. Because many a times, you will try to, if you say expenditure, you will know what is he agreed, what are the costs involved. He take a ballpark figure, and he will generally take, because once the security has been provided and the cargo is released, you cannot go back and ask for more. So he will take a figure which is a bit more. I would probably qualify that. He will try to be a bit more cautious, so to say, not a bit more, to ensure that it doesn't fall below, so to say. He will try to ensure that whatever amount is going to be spent or being incurred, that is covered by all the parties. Then he will take ballpark figures. So when the loss is being done, you will need to calculate by looking at the manifest, what's the value of the cargo, what's the value of the vessel, and you would basically look at it pro rata. So at the time this is the security is taken, it is a ballpark figure, it is not the actual figure. The adjustment comes after a few years, then you will exactly know, they will actually show out is that. That itself is a different art, so to say, you know exactly what it is. And that will rate how you need to be. I think more than this is something which it's very technical. I don't think I would be able to cover.
They'll have to be a cargo assessor or, so it's not going to be possible.
Would like to know more about average adjuster's settlement of GA claim. I guess that's also covered.
Yes.
Mr. Anil Malhotra would like to know difference between all liability cover and an MTO insurance cover.
If you are dealing as a transport operator, you may be doing different roles. You may have dual roles. You may act as a MTO. You may also act as a freight forwarder. You may also act as a NVOCC. You may have dual roles. So you could basically take a liability cover for all your roles as a transport operator. Now, you should, again, I'm sure you have good brokers, but your brokers would advise you that there are different facets of cover you should look at. One is cargo liability. The other main cover we should look at is a third-party liability. In my view, the third-party liability is the most important part of the cover because you don't have any contractual provisions to try and limit your exposure. Then the third one is errors and omission, penalties, all these things your broker will advise you. I think leaving that there is no difference in the sense that an MTO cover is basically restricted only to your role as an MTO. But if you're taking a liability cover, it might be for a different roles.
Ashley would like to know the general query, what the freight forwarder receives from the shipper exporter is, why should I pay? Because the fire on board the vessel is caused not because of him, and why can't the damages claimed from the shipper exporter who misdeclared the cargo? When general average is invoked and the shipper exporter has duly complied with GA compliances, I think they're two different questions. So if the cargo is found damaged in fire on board the vessel, and when the shipper exporter claim is not settled by the GA adjuster, which forced the shipper to approach the civil court claiming damages. Is it a right thing for the shipper exporter to invoke the normal civil court recourse, or do they need to approach arbitration? What remedy available for the shipper against GA adjuster for not settling the damages caused to the fire on board the vessel? So there are three parts to the question, I guess. So you can take one by one.
Actually, it's a very nice question. I'd probably like to take it all together because all linked to each other. Now let's assume you have, let's not take a container vessel, let's take a bulk vessel. And the bulk vessel has 4 holds. And you have fire on one of the holds, just for simplicity's sake. Now the options available to the master is do nothing, in which case the fire spreads from one hole to the other hole, and to the third hole and the fourth hole, and it becomes a total loss. The other option for the master is that he floods one of the holes, the adjoining hole, to the fire. Now the cargo and the hole, the adjoining hole was not under peril. It was still okay, right? But he floods it voluntarily so that he can stop the fire from moving from to the other holes, right? So what happens? The cargo in hole number 3 and 4 benefited out of this exercise, correct? The vessel also benefited out of this exercise. Don't you think it will be inequitable for the cargo in hole number 2 and also the vessel? Because what happens is, if you try and put more load in the vessel, right, the tensile strength will not accept it. So there will be damage to hull structure as far as hole number 2 is concerned. So it will be inequitable for these losses to fall on the holes 2 itself. So when general average was developed, the master does not look at whose cargo it is. He says, if I don't do anything, everyone is going to suffer. Insofar as the fire in hole number 1, you can't do anything. It's particular average. It's happened by fortune. But hole number 2, hole number 3, hole number 4, we can prevent. For this, I sacrifice hole number 2. So the loss suffered for hole number 2 is shared by hole number 2, 3, and 4. That is in basic is a general average. In the container thing, if you go to a container vessel, you may have 15, 20 holes or 20, 15, 20 different storage places. If you have a fire, you would need to probably use water or you use carbon dioxide, the adjoining holes. Again, you're doing something similar to not allow the fire to go. So while what Ashley says is perhaps correct, but if you don't do anything, everyone is going to suffer. So it is a way of appropriating or trying to redistribute the losses which have happened for the common benefit. If the fire was due to a fault of the owners and it doesn't have any exclusions, it does not prevent the cargo owners from pursuing the owners. It does not stop, and that's why you look at the rule D defense. You have a general average, you look at it, you take it. If you have a defense, you say, listen, the vessel was unseaworthy, your vessel did not have fire extinguishers, and that's why there is fire. If you have any of those provisions, you can go after owners for that. Yes. And I think if you do not have general average, what will happen is whenever you have this sort of incidents, owners would not like to spend money. Why? They say, listen, my exposure, because you really look at it, like just take Express Pearl, the value of the vessel is only 30 million. If you are going to spend, you'll probably spend much more. And there is no redistribution of this expenses. Owners might not be inclined to do it. So I think general average does do an important thing. It's only that some parts of it might not be palatable to the cargo interest, just like what Ashley brings it up. Perhaps we should relook at it, try and limit it. That's all I would promise. I hope that answers that part of it. And so far as arbitration is concerned, arbitration is only there if it's provided in the contract. So if your bill of lading provides for arbitration, then you perforce have to go for arbitration. If you go to the court, people will look at setting aside saying there's an arbitration clause. But if you don't have arbitration, if there is a jurisdiction clause, you need to look at the jurisdiction clause. And if there's none, then obviously you need to take the courts, go to the courts and say you have inherent jurisdiction because the vessel is in your port, admitted jurisdiction of that place, and you should take the jurisdiction, exercise it. So fighting is not the solution. Trying to deal with it, perhaps the way to do it.
But Jagan, if the cargo is insured, then I guess, all these things will not come in, even if the cargo gets destroyed because of general average. If your cargo is insured with an insurance company already, doesn't that take care of this thing, or is it different?
No, if your cargo is insured, the cargo insurers will take the lead and deal with it. Good cargo insurers will take. If the cargo is destroyed, there's no GA. GA means there has to be saving. So when you talk about the PA, the whole number one, that is destroyed. There's no GA. The whole number two, you do voluntary destruction. That is GA. So what you need to look at is, if it is total destruction, there's no GA, there's no salvage because there's no property saving. But whenever you're doing for some property saving, if you are insured, the insurers take the lead. They give the security. It takes out the sting of this issue. And they will wait for it and deal with it. They will engage lawyers. They'll probably try to deny, and that's what they have done in so many cases. CMA, CGM, Libra, they have denied GA on the basis, the vessel was unseaworthy, the vessel did not fulfill the requirement of seaworthiness. So there are ways to look at it, but there is a process will take many years.
So just related to this question, there is something that comes to my mind is what happens when, due to some incident on the vessel, when the containers fall into the sea,
okay.
Or that's one instance. The other is jettison of the cargo that the captain has to do basically to save the other cargoes or whatever. In these kind of situations, where does the GA come in, and how does it cover the liability of the owners?
So let's say you're going in a voyage and due to bad weather, some containers fall overboard. Yes, that is particular average that happens by chance. It was not voluntary. So the loss falls where it happens. So the cargo owners would be having their cargo insurance. They would need to claim from the insurers. And when the insurers will then go after owners saying, listen, your vessel was unseaworthy. Obviously owners will try to defend because it was of, perils of the seas or whatever defenses. They'll say they have exclusions available on the contract of carriage. And that's a conversation they both will have. But what happens is if you are insured, then the insurer pays, and it's two insurers who keep on fighting. Yes. And people like me make a living out of it. So that's how it works.
And jettison of cargo.
What happens is when you are grounded, yes, or due to bad seas, the vessel is taking in water. And you know that if my vessel has to be stable, I need to throw a cargo. That is jettison. That is voluntary.
So then it's general average.
Then it is general. Anything which is voluntary is general average. Anything which happens by chance is not general average.
So I just wanted to get that clarity that everybody understands the difference between general average and not general average.
So there has to be like the 5 requirements I said, that one is voluntary, common benefit, and it cannot be for only one person. It has to be for everyone.
I just wanted to place an example so people get it more clearer. So yeah, Priya, is there something else?
Yes. Two last questions which I have. One is from Mr. Atul, which says, just a minute. How the MTO can have exposure in terms of completion of voyage?
I think I answered that during the presentation. I said, there are two potential. I've seen one very recently that one of the container operators discharged the container at Colombo because he didn't get security, although the voyage was actually to Mumbai. So if you have issued a bill of lading and there are other parties involved in that bill of lading and they have provided security, even if they're not provided security, because security is only due as soon as the voyage comes to an end, but just before completion. Yes. So he can actually pursue the contractual party or the MTO saying that you have not completed the voyage. You have a duty of dispatch to complete the voyage. So you have an exposure of that. So leaving that, I don't think there's an exposure because if the owners are willing to carry it, you're looking at a back-to-back. But otherwise, contractually, because you're the party, everyone will come to you first and then only you go back to the owners. you could then argue, there is a provision in the contract allowing generally an operator to subcontract on any terms. The case in point is a Pioneer container, which talks about sub-bailment on terms. But that is something, is one way of arguing, but otherwise you would probably look at the contract and deal with it.
That's the last answer. Yeah, perfect. The last one is
Last question.
liability insurance.
Insurance cover is the most important concept in the freight industry. Now, most exporter and importer do take insurance cover for their cargo. In cases where the exporter claim is approved by the insurance company, the exporter usually gives subrogation right to the insurance company. In this situation, the insurance company will file claim against the freight company. What insurance cover should be taken by the freight company to protect its right from any such claim? I think that's a liability.
It's a liability. So basically what happens is, yes, when the cargo insurer pays, they will take something which is a subrogation receipt and they will go after the party at fault or the haulier or the carrier. And the carrier will then say, listen, then you will pay the song and dance. I am not liable. Or even if I'm liable, I'm entitled to limit liability. And this is my liability. And that's where the liability insurance comes into place. There are various risk carriers in India. I'm not privy to all of them, but I'm sure your members know them. The brokers are there to assist you. But there are risk carriers who provide this insurance, which is available. Like they call it transport liability insurance.
Great. Vasant.
With that, I guess all the questions are over. Over to Vasant. Vasant, you're there?
Yeah, Vasant.
Vasant?
Yeah, okay.
One second. Just point it towards Vasant. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. On behalf of AMTOI, I would sincerely thank Mr. Jagan for having such a lively, nice session, which was very informative, and most of the queries have been answered. I would request all the participants, in case they have any questions, they can send it to our secretary, wherein we will forward the same to Mr. Jagan and try and get answers for the same. Again, a big thanks to all the participants and Mr. Jagan, who has always been a well-wisher of AMTOI, and as and when we have invited him, he's been very happy and come here to educate our members, and we look forward to continuing our association in the days to come. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all the participants and my members.
Thank you everyone for attending, much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Jagannath, for a fantastic session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Priya.
Bye.
Yeah, usually.